start. Prabhakar, can we ready? Can we start? So we'll start, sir. I think the speakers have come and we'll start. Thanks once again. Okay. Respected friends from all over the country and part of the world. Good morning to all. There has been, a lot of, last minute hazards because of the power fluctuations. We're a little sorry about that. And having, already lost some time, I want to start. Hi, hello. Respected Mr. Subramaniam, Secretary to the Government of India. Professor Raja Samuel, Principal, Madras School of Social Work. Professor Mangaleshwaran, Department of Social Work, Bharatidasan University, Tiruchirappalli. Professor Lakshmi, Department of Social Work, Central University of Kerala, who are all our partners in this program. Distinguished expert speakers from within India. I see, Dr. Liz, Dr. Shekhar, Dr. Mrs. Femada, and others. I mentioned the names of the people, so they're all there with us. I would like to welcome them. And Dr. Ajay Bailey, of course, from Netherlands. I'd like to have all of you being with us. And yes, it's delightful to also, invite participants in this number, which is a huge number. They're all coming in a huge number. A lot of students have come in, postgraduate students have come, nursing students have come, and also representative of senior citizens' homes across the country, particularly in South India, have checked in. I think they're all concerned about what's happening in abuse, and they're all very much here. And I think what we are trying to do is to, share the international experiences, what is happening around the world, and feel at least good that we are not alone as far as elder abuse is concerned. The incidents may be more because of the sheer number of population of this country, but nevertheless, we are all looking together and working together to see how do we take a message to the entire society of harmony in families and society at large, in which every individual lives safely. I think that's the main purpose. Being old, the segment of population gets marginalized very easily and therefore become very vulnerable.
Yes.
In society, when the elders do not get their share of respect, care, and concern, and get mistreated and misbehaved with, we call it elder abuse. We welcome Mr. Subramaniam. I don't think I could have got a better person to address this august body on the international body of experts who are all there to listen to him, being the Secretary to the Government of India, the Nodal Ministry, which looks after aging population in this country. And I think all of us know in India that in the last 1 year, I think he has done, I always tell, he has done in 1 year what probably we have not seen in the last 7, 8 years of time. He has, really made a lot of differences in policy making as well as programs. I don't think normally people want to go and meet him, but he ensures that he meets people and talks to them and get things moving. And he has really pushed a lot of agenda on aging. I don't think we could have got a better person to inaugurate this conference than anyone else. And I'm very sure your thought-provoking morning session, inaugural session, will be emulated by other country representatives who are here, if they find it useful to the culture basics. We acknowledge our esteemed colleagues from the educational institution that joined in our efforts to sensitize and educate the citizens. We are aware you will lay a strong foundation to build right values and attitudes in the youth. I think one of the big focus in this training, in this program, for 43 days program, we are bringing in as many younger people as possible, because we believe the quality of life of the elderly very much lies in their hands as they go into middle age. Not only they will be suffering, they will be probably victims when they become 60, 65, if they're not to conquer it right now. We acknowledge and welcome experts who graciously accepted to address and share their wisdom with the delegates. I don't want to really get on to why the United Nations, declared, this day, because keeping in mind. But one major concern that I don't want to really talk about the statistics also, because there are people like Dr. Shekhar who is going to really talk about what is happening in India through LASI. The United Nations has definitely mentioned 1 in 6 people experience some form of abuse in their everyday life. I think that's a matter of concern. I think they're all talking about big numbers, but the fact remains there is an abuse at every point of time. 1 in 15 to 1 in 10 people get abused. I think this is a concern that we have to see. With the growth in number of elderly, the abuse is likely to go up. With the longevity, the decreased health problems are going to increase. So therefore, the old people are likely to be more, likely to be the victims of elder abuse. I think this is something that we really need to do. I was just looking at 1 or 2 points that I think very important. A total of 33.4% said they were criticized and scolded often, according to one of the surveys conducted in Vietnam. I just took one example. In Japan, a law on elder abuse prevention and care support was introduced in 2006. A country like Japan, which it talks about, highly developed place, also is experiencing, a huge level of abuse. According to the National Council on USA, 1 in 10%, that is 10% of the people 60 and above experience some form of abuse. UNFPA India has reported in 2017, 11% abuse. I'm sure Dr. Shekhar is going to give a different picture today of his experience. And I'm very sure Dr. Liz, who is going to talk from European Union, will also give a perspective of what's happening on, elderly, what's happening in the European countries. We are also going to have 1 or 2 more speakers coming in too. I really want to, before I really close in and welcome Mr. Subramaniam to talk, I must definitely, place on record, the Government of India enacted the Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act 2007, which is one of the, in my opinion, one of the landmark decisions the government took many years ago in 2007. And I think this is recognized by the Constitution. The second, this amendment to this is also placed before the government, of which Mr. Subramaniam is one of the architects to get this done. And when it's done, I'm sure standards in old age homes will also likely to improve. I think under the secretary, I think having formulated a lot of new schemes and putting in a lot of accountability is one of the focus Mr. Subramaniam has laid in the last 1 year time, making people who are receiving funds accountable to what they do. And therefore, quality of services improves, and therefore abuse will come down. That's our expectation. Heritage Foundation, we established in 1994, has promoted positive and healthy aging, offer lifelong learning through our third age school of learning, conduct training programs. Last year, we conducted 80 programs, part of which was funded by the Government of India, but most of the programs were done by us. Thanks to the Bharati Dasan University, which is social work department, contributed a lot to that, and many other organizations you have already listed. We have trained, one of the important development that took place this year was, we trained owners, managers, social workers, doctors in senior citizens homes in Telangana and Tamil Nadu, which has received an excellent feedback, and they were asking us to do more programs so that they will improve their quality of life. I think with the support from the Ministry of Social Justice, not only us, probably many others are going to do a lot of good work for this. I'm sure the experts who will be speaking in the next 3 days will share tremendous trends and practices to combat elder abuse. I welcome all of you once again. I now request Mr. Subramaniam to kindly address the delegates. Thank you very much. And once again, I want to appeal to all the delegates. We are very sorry about the delay because of the variety of power fluctuations and inconvenience. Once again, sorry for the inconvenience. Sir, Mr. Subramaniam, sir.
Dr. Gangadhar, thanks for the kind words and a very good introduction. And all the delegates who are here. My greetings to everybody on this important day, the World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. So this is a global event that's being done at the edges of the United Nations. So it's now almost 10 years since the UN has declared 15th of June as the World Elder Abuse Awareness Day.
I think somebody's dog is making some noise. I will request you to kindly mute your mic, please. Thank you. Okay.
Okay, that's my dog. So,
so sorry.
I apologize.
No.
So friends, so it's now 10 years since this declaration has happened, and year after year, many seminars, many awareness events are being held across the world in many countries. And people like Dr. Gangadhar is extremely active in bringing together large number of experts, activists, NGOs, government officers. And these events are important because they focus on the issue very significantly. I'm actually not a big votary of events because sometimes what happens is that the event itself becomes the end goal, and little is left for the action that follows, that should be following. So I always say that event should be a starting point, not an end point of a prolonged and sustained action as per a strategy, and with very clear set of people working together. I hope that the same thing will prevail in this event, which is so well organized. Thank you, Dr. Gangadhar, again for putting together so many people from across the world for 3 days, and I'm sure there will be productive discussions in this. I wanted to, state that the government of India has started what is called as the elder line, and of course, Dr. Gangadharan has been involved in it when it was started in Telangana to start with a different name. What elder line does is to connect to all the senior citizens who are in distress. Whoever has got a problem, a grievance, a difficulty, they can call up a number and somebody is going to attend to it, either physically or giving advice on telephone. So this elder line has now started in about 9 states, and we hope that it will be So we did one survey of the 20,000 calls which have come in the first 15 days. And we found that most of the calls, distress calls which are coming, are pertaining to COVID, because that is the latest problem that everybody has been facing. And more so, there is greater anxiety in the elderly because everybody has predicted that elderly are more at risk for this pandemic. So 64% of the calls, which are distress calls which have come, were about the COVID, availability of beds, joining of hospitals, advice, availability of oxygen, availability of medicines. So this has been one very major factor that has been weighing heavy on the minds of the senior citizens. There is 3% of the calls were only about the abuse. And more than 50% of those 3% were about the physical and financial abuse. And about 19% were about the neglect, and 19% are verbal abuse, and 9% are emotional abuse. So this is not to say that the elderly abuse is very low in our society. It only shows that there is a very high tolerance levels for the elderly abuse, because large number of elders who are in the family setting, they always feel that, well, I mean, they don't complain for various sociological family reasons, and then they take it as something which is their fate, and then the tolerance levels are too high, and that is the reason why I think a large number of elderly abuse cases do not get reported. So this is one challenge which all of us must understand, and then see how to educate the elderly to complain in case they find any abuse, there has to be zero tolerance to the abuse of the elderly, and that has to begin from the victim themselves. Victims, unless the victims come forward and complain, very little can be achieved. Friends, I always feel very strongly that abuse is end of a road. You know, the beginning of the abuse starts from feeling that this person is a burden on the household. I think this is the starting point of the entire abuse in the family setting. So I have a feeling that the abuse should not be looked at as a standalone problem. Yeah. Abuse is the end result of many events which actually impact the psyche of the elderly and also the family members who are supposed to be their caregivers. In order to address this, I have a feeling that we should not look at elderly abuse as merely a legal matter, which has to be complained in the police stations or taken to the courts. It has to be. There has to be set of activities that the society has to take in order to ensure that the abuse does not occur. So what are the actions that the society can take? Firstly, I think is that every elderly person who is willing to work must find some sort of a productive work. He should feel useful to himself, to the family, and to the society. I think this is a very, very important starting point for preventing the abuse in future. So we are therefore focusing on livelihoods. How can we ensure that the able elderly, because at least half of the elderly are able, they can do some work, different type of work as per their skill sets, as per their experience, as per their health conditions. We must provide an opportunity for them to engage themselves in a productive work. Once they are in a productive work, they will not feel that they are burden on the family. Family also feels that there is some amount of some amount of productive interaction that is happening between them. So I think this will be a very healthy starting point for preventing abuse in the family setting. The second thing is that there has to be companionship. And this companionship can happen only when we organize the elderly into smaller groups at a mohalla level, at the town level. Town level, of course, becomes somewhat bigger. At a mohalla level, at village level, we can certainly organize the elderly into smaller groups where they can sit together, share their experiences, find companionship, where they can get emotional support. I think that is a very important second point that I would like to state. Then it is also important that the legal machinery which has been set up for protection of the elders and the acts which are implemented by the government must be implemented well, and that can be done only if there is fair amount of activity on the part of the activists, where they start interacting with the law enforcing machinery and also the executive authorities. So I think we need to really look at how to prevent a case from becoming an abuse, a case of abuse, and that is actually going to really help a lot. So I therefore call upon all of you to look at ways by which we can organize the elderly into in smaller groupings where they can take up productive employment, and then they also feel that they can support themselves. In this respect, Government of India has constituted about 7 eminent expert groups. These are the groups which have been asked to look at various facets of the elderly care in the country. And I'm happy to say that many of them have actually come out with a series of recommendations based on which we are going to launch several initiatives. Some of the initiatives that we wanted to look at is how can we organize 100,000 self-help groups of the elderly in various parts, and how we can actually bring them together on a plan, on a plank of common action. This is one aspect that we are going to focus on. We're going to invest resources in this training of the people. Then second thing is that how we can provide skilling, reskilling of the elderly so that they can find a suitable employment. Third thing we are looking at is, can we have a virtual employment exchange where there is a person who is seeking the services of the elderly, and then the elderly are offering their services, and then they are matched on a virtual platform. Then the fourth thing is that, is it possible to have is it possible to have a system by which the poorest, most destitute out of the elders will get proper nutrition and health support at the village level and at the town level. So there is one particular group which is working on this. Then we are looking at the research of the pertaining to the issues of the elderly. How can we put together large number of researchers who can actually keep working on various themes pertaining to the elderly. Then another group is looking at, can we build capacities of the caregivers? Can we train large number of caregivers so that if anybody who requires support can easily get access to a well-trained and motivated caregiver or bedside assistance? So we are looking at this sort of capacity building also. So friends, I think there are several initiatives which are coming. As Dr. Gangadhar has pointed out, we are going to amend this Act of the Senior Citizens, and then we are going to bring in certain standards in terms of maintaining the institutions, and also ensure that every district in the country must have at least one old age home where people who are otherwise not in a family circumstance can find a proper, decent place to live in. So these are some of the initiatives. I will stop here. I'm sure there's a lot of wisdom, there's a lot of experience among the people who are here. I'm looking for solutions. I'm looking for solutions which can spur action at the field level, because that is what is required. There's a fair amount of discussion that has already happened. I think people are waiting for some amount of action, and I hope this 3-day seminar will bring that, and I wish all of you all the very best. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Very nice that you enumerated everything. I think the entire set of people who are participating in this program understand what the Government of India is doing. I'm really grateful to you for being so kind to be with us on this important day, the World Elder Abuse Day. I would request you to, despite your busy schedule, I will still request you to at least stay back to listen to Dr. Shekhar, who has been the principal investigator of the LASI studies. Before doing though, I would request I would want to acknowledge here 3 important people who have been behind this program. Dr. Mangaleshwaran from Bharathidasan University. The second person is Dr. Morning. Okay. The second person is Professor Raja Samuel. This is my alma mater, principal of the Madras School of Social Work. And the third is Dr. Lakshmi from Central University, Kerala. So these are the 3 people who stood by me. And today, Dr. Raja Samuel will be moderating the session. So I would request Dr. Raja Samuel to take over now and introduce the speakers and carry on. Thank you, sir. Once again, Mr. Subramaniam, thank you. I'll be obliged if you can stay for some time to listen to Mr. Shekhar. Thank you.
A very good morning to all the participants, especially to the dignitaries, Mr. Subramaniam, as well as the other speakers for the day. It's a delight to welcome all of you for this particular session. We have 4 great speakers today who have years of research and experience behind them. Let me start introducing one by one the speakers as per the order of their appearance, as per the order of the speech. Glad to introduce Dr. T.V. Shekhar, who is Professor and Head of the Department of Population Policies and Programs at the International Institute for Population Sciences at Mumbai. He is a principal investigator of the famous longitudinal aging study in India, popularly known as LASI, and also the study on global aging and adult health. He holds a PhD from Institute of Social and Economic Change. He is trained in demography and sociology. His areas of research include population aging, social demography, gender issues, social protection programs, and public health. He was Fulbright Nehru Senior Fellow at Cornell University, and apart from that, he was visiting fellow at Wellcome Trust at UCL London, and Maison de Sciences Home Paris, Lund University Sweden, Oxford Brookes University UK. And he has authored and edited more than 10 books and has more than 100 research articles in international journals. He was a consultant to Government of India, UNFPA, UNICEF, Population Council, and many other organizations. Currently, Professor Shekhar is also the president of the Indian Association for Social Sciences and Health. And next to Dr. Shekhar, we have Professor Ajay Bailey, who will speak after Dr. Shekhar. Professor Ajay Bailey serves in the Department of Human Geography and Spatial Planning, Faculty of Geosciences, Utrecht University, the Netherlands. He also currently the chair in Social Urban Transitions and Dr. TMA Pai, endowed chair in Qualitative Methods of Manipal University, India. Professor Ajay holds a PhD in demography from the Faculty of Spatial Sciences, University of Groningen, has over 15 years of international experience ranging from teaching both at University of Groningen and Utrecht University, apart from guiding PhD and postdoc scholars, and also leading a huge number of funded research and action projects worth more than 1.5 million euros, focused on aging, migration, and public health. Professor Ajay is also on the editorial board of over 10 international acclaimed journals. Our next speaker would be Femada Shamam, who has been working in the field of care and support to the elderly for 16 years. In 1999, she joined the Association for the Aged team as a social worker, and now she serves as the Chief Operating Officer and is responsible for planning and implementation of services to the elderly, approximately covering 7,500 people. Social work and Bachelor of Commerce training set the foundation to create a balance between understanding the need and implementing sustainable models of care and support. Femada's passion is exploring new models of care and support. She also serves on the board of Global Aging Network and Common Age and is part of the Pass It On Network. She has presented papers on aging issues on various international and international platforms. Her passion for the sector is rooted in a belief that every person can make a choice to create a world in which older people can participate, grow, and thrive. That's Femada Shamam for you. And finally, we have Dr. Elizabeth Mestenios, who is a UK-trained sociologist and is also an independent social researcher, who has primarily worked through the Sextant Research Group in Athens since 1991, undertaking a wide range of EU-funded research projects. She's involved in research on good practices towards older workers for the European Foundation for the improvement of living and working conditions, while she's currently engaged in research on identifying good practices towards older persons in Cyprus. Recently, she completed research on family carers and services to support them, on older women and aging research, mapping existing research and identifying knowledge gaps on older women in Europe. And she's also the head of health education and older people. And she also works on issues related to social exclusion. And she has published a wide variety of areas, including older people, refugees, and labor market. Dr. Liz is a founder member of the new Greek NGO for older people, 50+ Hellas, devoted to promoting the well-being and social inclusion of all older people, primarily through information, advocacy, and research. That's the panel we have, very acclaimed, very experienced, absolutely amazing 4 people we have to listen today. Let us begin with Professor T.V. Shekhar. Each speaker will take about 15 minutes. And after all the speakers finish, we can take questions. Thank you. Over to Professor Shekhar.
Very good morning to all of you. And on this very important day of World Elder Abuse Awareness Day, I'm thankful to Heritage Foundation and also to Dr. K.R. Gangadharan and their collaborating partners for inviting me to present one of the major initiatives of the Government of India to generate a scientific database on the social, economic, and health conditions of elderly in India. I hope my PowerPoint is visible, Dr. Samuel.
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Okay,
Yes.
okay. I'm also very happy to present before Sri R. Subramaniam, who is the Principal Secretary in the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, who takes care of the welfare of elderly in India, and also one of the sponsors of this longitudinal aging study in India. This is a major initiative. I would spend a few minutes on what is the LASI, and then I will get into some of the findings coming out about the elder discrimination, elder abuse, and neglect based on the LASI findings. As you are very much aware that we do not have much nationally representative data set and evidence on elderly's conditions in India. There are many micro level studies. There are a lot of sociological studies, few surveys and here, but there was a felt need to have a nationally representative and globally acceptable data, and by the government for better for their policy making as well as for the researchers. So LASI is an initiative by the government of India to produce that internationally comparable and globally acceptable data using the state-of-the-art technology in the data collection. And that will help in providing the foundation for national and state level policy making to address the challenges of the growing elderly population in our country. So LASI emerged as a response to all these concerns by government, various organizations, and research institutes like ours. And LASI is India's first nationwide longitudinal study. Longitudinal study, I mean that we are going back to the same households and same individuals on a periodical basis. And our plan is to track them for the next 25 years and to find out the changes happening to their social, economic, and health condition. And LASI is the largest longitudinal aging study in the world in terms of its coverage and sample size. Now, LASI is sponsored by the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare and Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, Government of India. Dr. Subramaniam in his inaugural address mentioned that one of the important dimensions, focus of his ministry is to generate the evidence and support the research in the field of aging and elderly welfare. So this is an effort in that direction. We are also supported by National Institute of Aging and National Institute of Health, USA, and United Nations Population Fund. The International Institute for Population Sciences, IIPS, we are the nodal institution. We are a deemed university under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare based in Mumbai, conducting the responsible to conduct the LASI and implement the LASI throughout India. We also have the international collaborators like Harvard Chan School of Public Health and University of Southern California, and national collaborators like regional geriatric centers located in various parts of India, ICMR Nari Research Institute based in Pune, and CHEST Research Foundation. Now, with LASI, India is entering to an elite club of health and retirement studies. These are the studies starting with the health and retirement study in the United States, then the English longitudinal aging study, the European aging study, and in Asian countries, we have the Chinese longitudinal aging study, Korean, Japanese, and Indonesian. So India is also joining this elite club of health and retirement studies with LASI. The advantage here is that the survey protocol, survey instruments, everything is designed in synchronizing with the similar studies happening around 40 countries in the world. So that will provide us to have a cross-cultural and cross-national comparison to understand the conditions of elderly. And it is very crucial for a country like India, where we have, as per the 2011 census, we have 100 million elderly population. But by 2050, it will be around 320 million elderly population in our country. That is going to be a big challenge for the government, for the society, and the country as a whole. Now, what are the important goals of LASI? LASI will provide, as I said earlier, internationally comparable research design using the based on that, a national level policy making, a long-term scientific research, empirical evidence for that. It will provide the data for strengthening the ongoing national program for healthcare of elderly. It will also support the various social security and pension policies of Government of India, mostly implemented by the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, and also by the state governments. So it will provide the feedback on how these schemes are working, what are the problems, what are the barriers, what is the extent of coverage. It will also help in developing a comprehensive national policy framework for the older persons to expand their social security programs across the country. Now, broadly, the longitudinal aging study in India covers 5 important domains. The health dimension covers the disease burden and risk factors. It is not only the self-reported health condition. We are also using a range of biomarkers. We are measuring the health conditions of this elderly population. Their diabetes levels, their blood pressure, their grip strength, their vision strength, various dimensions of that. We have a lot of information gathered on healthcare and health financing. The social dimension, family, social network, living arrangement, caregiving, various and elder abuse, various dimensions. Economic dimensions about elderly and their households, about their income, wealth, expenditure, assets, and the coverage, awareness about various social security programs and legislations meant for the welfare of senior citizens in India. So broadly, it covers the disease burden, the risk factors for communicable and non-communicable diseases, and it will provide estimates at the national level and state level about the extent of diseases and issues available. So the LASI is designed in such a way that we are in a position to provide the estimates at the national level and at the state levels. As far as healthcare and financing is concerned, the extent of healthcare utilization, choice of healthcare providers, health expenditure of the household, it's a major concern, and the extent of health insurance and its acceptability, and also the quality of care, out-of-pocket health expenditure. So various dimensions related to the economic dimension, health financing of the elderly and their households are also covered here. Coming to the social dimension of that, I think most of you are very much interested. We have the information on the multi-generational family structure, living arrangements, social networks, financial support, participation in social activities, social connectedness, and life satisfaction. The financial support received and provided by the elderly. We found that generally elderly considered to be a burden or liability, but in our survey we found that good number of elderly are still financially supporting their family, taking care of themselves and also supporting their family. And the caregiving and various dimensions. And also the participation of older people in social organizations, in social activities, and the perception of elderly about their isolation, the discrimination they face or they feel, perceived discrimination in the society, and ill treatment that is happening both within the household and outside the household. We also have data about the awareness and utilization of various social security schemes, including the widely known old age pension schemes and the widow pension schemes, and the awareness about various legislations and programs meant for the senior citizens in our country. Now, economic dimensions, we cover the workforce participation, income expenditure, pension benefits, housing conditions, and the extent of poverty and food security among the older population. Now, so broadly, LASI is designed with a lot of innovations. It is focusing on comprehensive coverage of health dimensions, economic dimensions, sociological dimensions of India's growing elderly population. It has a set of biomarkers, direct health examination to understand the real health situations. When we compare the self-reported health and really measured health condition, we found a lot of differences, particularly in rural areas. And we are using the computer-assisted personal interviewing and also the latest technologies to provide the best quality and best possible data for the government and for the researchers. Now, LASI, as I mentioned earlier, provide a national level estimates as well as state estimates for all the states and union territories. So we have covered around 72,250 individuals in our survey, including 31,000 elderly population. Okay, and this is the first round of survey. Now, next year again, we are going back to the same households and same individuals, and we will try to understand what are the changes happening to them. So the plan is to have this survey for the next 25 years. The first wave was carried out in 2017 and 2018, and the next wave we are planning next year in 2022. And every 3 years, a follow-up survey of this elderly population and their households. So basically, LASI used 3 schedules. One is an household schedule to collect the household information, an individual schedules, which includes all the social economic dimensions, mental health, health conditions, biomarkers, and then a community schedule. Wherever the survey is carried out, whether it is a village or urban locality, we also collected information about those communities, and we are able to relate the community characteristics with the household behaviors and individual behaviors. So now let me, with a shortage of time, let me just briefly tell you some of the findings emerging out of the LASI. This LASI report was released by Honorable Health Minister Dr. Harshvardhan Ji on 6th of January in 2021. And the report is widely available, and you can download from the ministry's website or our website. And the fact sheets are also available for each state. If you want to know nearly 190 important indicators, what are the characteristics or situation of each of the states and union territories. So as you are aware, Indian condition, the 90% of elderly are living with their families. But what is more important here is that 6% of elderly are living alone, which was only 2% in the 2011 census. A considerable change is happening. And among the elderly women, it is around 9%. So, and it is much higher in some states like Kerala and Tamil Nadu. This is what I'm talking is a national average. Okay, so 9% of elderly women, particularly widows, are living alone. So there is a major change happening in the living conditions, living arrangements of elderly that we have to factor. We also asked a question to these elderly respondents. Are they satisfied with the current living arrangements, or they have any plans to change their living arrangements in future? Nearly 5% of elderly reported that they would like to, they have an intention to change their living arrangement. It's in a way an indication of they are not very comfortable or happy with the current living arrangement. Coming to the elder abuse, according to our survey at the national level, 1 out of 20 elderly experienced abuse during the last 1 year. This is the data about last 1 year. 1 out of 20, of course, it varies from state to state. As I am giving is a national thing. It is relatively high among the women elderly, and those who live in rural areas. And we found that elderly with less education or no schooling, those who are divorced or separated, and belong to the poor households are more likely to be ill-treated. So they are at a more vulnerability of elder abuse and neglect. Now, some of the other characteristics, as I said earlier, higher proportion of elderly who live alone and those who are divorced or separated or deserted experience ill-treatment compared to others. Elderly women experiencing more ill-treatment compared to elderly men, and those who belong to the poorest households are having a higher vulnerability, higher risk of experiencing this abuse. We also found among those who are experiencing elder abuse, what are the different forms of or types of elder abuse they are the victims of that. So broadly, we have categorized that here into 4 groups: the physical abuse, the verbal and emotional abuse, economic exploitation, and neglect. So nearly half of them reported that among those who are experiencing abuse reported that they are experiencing neglect. Of course, this may be partly their perception, but this is what they reported. Among those who experience ill treatment, more than 3/4 experience verbal and emotional ill treatment, like Dr. Subramaniam mentioned in the inaugural address, that many times it starts with the household, and many times the family members consider that elderly as a burden on them, and sometimes they started talking badly in a humiliating manner, disrespectful manner, and further it leads to more and more emotional and verbal abuse. And 24% of them face physical ill treatment, and nearly one-third among those who are experienced abuse or reported experience abuse face economic exploitation in one form or other. So these are some of the data emerging. And who are the perpetrators of elder abuse or ill treatment? Now, as shown by many other surveys, the caregivers, those who are supposed to care for the elderly, they are the primary abusers of the elderly, the family members. Nearly in 38% of the cases, they are sons or daughters, including grandchildren. Nearly 36% of the cases, the son-in-law or daughter-in-law, and 7% of cases, even the spouse and siblings. So, so the primary caregivers are turning to be the primary abusers of the elderly. Okay, they are ill-treated by their own children and grandchildren, and also, so the problem here is that we understand that what we are getting from a survey is really underreported and underestimated, because when you go to a household to conduct a survey, and when we discuss about elder abuse or ill treatment, the victims or the respondents are less likely to report the cases because they are afraid of their own family members. They may not be able to provide the actual situation. So what we get from these surveys may be only a tip of the iceberg situation. Now, in the LASI survey, we interestingly asked a question. Are they feeling, whether they consider that they are being treated unfairly by their society or neighborhood? It is their perception. Okay. So 7% of the elderly respondents in our survey stated that they felt discriminated on a day-to-day basis. Nearly 4% of them face that they are facing one form of discrimination. 3% of them said that they are facing more than 2 kinds of discrimination. We further probed what are the reasons which they think that this perceived discrimination is. So good number of them said that, 62% of them stated that age, being a senior citizen, elderly is the main reason for discrimination, followed by the economic status. So that is what they felt from the society, because they are old, they are not able to economically support, they are not able to work, they are not able to react. So they are the victims of this kind of discrimination, or at least they perceive that they are being discriminated in the society and belong to the poor house. But we also found that particularly in the rural areas, religion and caste and even the physical appearance are also a factor, including the gender, also a factor for this kind of a perceived discrimination as reported by elderly. Of course, physical disability among the elderly is also one important dimension. So we also did some analysis due to shortage of time. I'm not getting to that. We did some analysis of elderly who experience ill treatment and abuse, and they measured their psychological conditions using various scales and depression. We found that those who experience ill treatment at home have 5 times higher probability of having psychological and neurological problems. And they also reported the life satisfaction among them is much, much lower compared to the other elderly. So the elder abuse altogether results in many health conditions, many emotional problems among elderly, which is very rarely reported. And it is a combination of personal, familial, economic, and psychological factors responsible for the increasing incidence of elder abuse happening in our society. In long back, we used to say that Indian families respect the elderly and elder abuse is not happening here. But surveys after surveys and more investigations reveal that elder abuse is a reality and we have to face it. And often people are afraid of reporting elder abuse and neglect. And because of this, the real magnitude of ill treatment is a matter of speculation. We are not getting the actual information from this survey. I will stop with one more slide here. the principal secretary mentioned about an important legislation of the Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act, which was passed by Indian Parliament in 2007. We asked our elderly respondents the awareness about it. Surprisingly, only 12% of elderly are aware about it, this very important legislation, which has many provisions to protect them economically and socially, and make it mandatory for their children to look after their old parents. But the awareness is very low. So we need to have a lot of campaigns, programs involving the NGOs, civil society groups, residents welfare association, and even the Panchayati Raj institutions to create more awareness about not only about the act, but also about various social security programs for the elderly, various provisions for the elderly, and other things. And finally, those who are interested to look into the LASI report, it's a very detailed report of around 700 pages, and it is available on our website. You can download the LASI report, which gives a very detailed description about social, economic, health, and mental health conditions of elderly. And so that is available. We also have produced a fact sheet where 185 indicators of each and every state is provided there. So if you are looking for a quick data and statistics, you can refer the statistics. And large number of researchers have joined this group. So those who are interested, the data is in public domain. People can use and work on this, and there is a scope for doing a lot of research at the state level and at the national level. So you can send a request, and we are providing all this information and data free of cost. And if you have any more questions, you are most welcome to write to us. We'll be happy to provide the information. So let me stop here. Thank you for a patient hearing, and thank you for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shekhar, for that very important sharing of this great study. And I think it's distressing to note the scale of abuse that's been happening for our elderly. But it brings to the fore the important predictors or the other variables that are causing the abuse. So it's very, it provides us a good understanding of what we need to intervene in. Thank you for that very important sharing. We will now move over to Professor Ajay Bailey. Sir, over to you now.
Thank you. Let me just put my start. Great. Thanks a lot for inviting me for this session, and I'm happy to follow Professor Shekhar into this talk. So to follow one demographer after the other, it's a pleasure. Also to the Heritage Foundation, my congratulations in continuing this work and bringing such a big group together to raise awareness on issues around abuse and neglect. So today I will speak a bit more on the impact of this abuse and neglect on older adults, and what we have learned from different projects, and I'll give some examples. So someone had already posted this in the chat earlier, so I'm not going to go through the whole of it. It's just that it's not just that it happens in India, it happens all over the world. And it's not that the incidence is changing, it's just that the impact of these abuse on older adults is much more severe in situations where people experience large-scale inequalities and have the agency to report, to seek care, and to seek situation or alternative shelters. The rates of elder abuse in that sense has also increased due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in terms of situations of pandemics or natural disasters, we already see that the vulnerable groups get more affected because of lower bargaining power within the social setup. What WHO also reports is that this is predicted to increase as many countries are experiencing rapid aging populations. Though rapid aging populations is not an issue to increase elder abuse, it is the situation of the families in which older adults are aging and what kind of inequalities these families face in the global south, and how that has an impact on caregiving and the ability to finance this care, ability to finance healthcare. So all of this has to be taken into account when we discuss the motivations or the reasons why abuse and neglect takes place within these households. So in a general sense, we assume homes are safe spaces, but homes, as we see with different literature, are not necessarily safe spaces for older adults, because older adults, as Professor Shekhar showed, that it could be the closest family members who perpetuate physical or emotional abuse. What we also need to take into account is not just of the older adults themselves, but also substance abuse by family members leads to increased violence among towards older adults. The older adults also have this ability of, like the secretary said, is that more older adults should report about these things. But the issue around shame, the issue about talking about whether they are going to report, what would people think, all these kinds of issues restrict older adults from reporting abuse. The other more practical reason is once they report such situations, and we have seen this in our data collection in Kerala and other places, is that the loss of home and loss of support. In a sense, there is a very big giveaway in a sense of that they are either thrown out of the house or left abandoned at railway stations, bus stations in that sense. So in that sense, loss of support also is one of the reasons why people do not report abuse. The other issue in terms of lack of alternative arrangement, sure where this is coming from, but lack of alternative arrangements in terms of where would they go after they have reported such conditions. Lack of information on where they would reach, how they can reach an old age home, for example, or a care home, or a temporary shelter for that. Homes also are spaces where women, to a large extent, face a larger burden of intergenerational care. So it's not just they're caring for grandchildren, but more often they're also caring for other older adults in the household. Given this larger burden of care, they also often face abuse within the household, and they don't have enough time to take care of themselves. So homes, though romanticized as being the safe and happy place for these things, for some older adults can be quite a precarious living situation. Institutions, and I was quite happy to hear from the secretary that there has been efforts to standardize the nature of institutions, but more importantly, it's about establishing protocols of care. Given the situation that many of these organizations are also started locally and have the ability to say, maybe they don't have the right kind of training to provide this geriatric care. So how can these capacity building initiatives can take place at the community level to improve geriatric care, especially within these institutions? What we increasingly see is ageism or ageist remarks in hospitals, clinics, or care homes further increase insecurity. That also restricts people from accessing care because they're afraid to be abused again. Every incident of abuse, verbal abuse, or even being pushed around, and all these kind of things can further reduce chances of them accessing care. We need to start to differentiate between the different kinds of care homes. So, okay, one, I agree that every district should have a care home, but maybe we start to also look at different ways. Care homes for able-bodied older adults as opposed to care homes for older adults who require long-term care. What we've seen in some of our data collection is once the older adult falls ill or cannot care for himself, then they are sent out of these old age homes because more practical reasons, these old age homes do not have facilities to provide palliative care. So investing in more community-led housing and institutional care will also increase a kind of ownership that people have towards these care homes, that it becomes part of the community, becomes more normalized to live within those care homes. What I would like to also bring up, and Mr. Shekhar also highlighted this, is what is the long-term impact of this? And then I would like to bring in this idea of the life course impact of neglect and abuse. So it's not just that the many older adults in lower socioeconomic or more precarious living situations are experiencing abuse once they turn 60 or plus. It could be that they have experienced abuse over a longer period of time. So for example, women face domestic violence earlier on when they're young, and then over life course experience of domestic violence puts them at higher vulnerability to psychological disorders, neurologic conditions. So in that way, we need not look at impact only from a point perspective, but take a more life course perspective. What has been the life history of this person and how that has led to this particular impact. So in terms of age, gender, income, and disability, all these elements, when combined together, increase inequalities, increase the impact of neglect and abuse. And what we see now more in relation to food security is that nutritional neglect in early years and adulthood also has an impact on morbidities at later ages, in terms of, especially among the girl children. What we see is that early years when girl children have malnutrition or are being fed less or being given less access to nutritional food, it has an impact in adulthood, of course, but more so in older ages when morbidities start to increase. So this is the kind of more, we have to take a more life course perspective into it. So in terms of the socio-emotional impact, be it public spaces, family, or community, many of them face different kinds of issues. So in terms of fear, insecurity, when people are afraid of accessing public spaces or insecure about it, that leads to further isolation, sense of loneliness, and psychological impact on this group of people. The same goes for family, they don't feel safe in these environments. Community, as communities change, as older adults also, they see a lot more of their own cohort have either passed away or moved away. Hence, their ties become quite, or the network in which they operate becomes much smaller and smaller. So then accessing help or accessing support becomes also quite difficult within these cohorts. I agree with the previous speakers in terms of that the prevention is the key to change, to think about, as I said, in terms of awareness campaigns, alternatives to home actually, and then it's very specific. Where can you go and live in case you're faced an abuse and you've reported it? What is your next option? That I think is the most specific element that we can provide for older adults, so that they know there is an option, that they can make a more informed choice of moving out of abusive environments. Provision of safe houses and emergency care, and also not just reacting to situations after the abuse has taken place or serious issues have taken place. Like people may report a fall, but the fall could have been other reasons in which this could have been reported. So equipping doctors and nurses earlier in the community for screening of such conditions. This would also help in preventing abuse, preventing the more deleterious effects of abuse among older adults. I'm very happy to hear this elder line has been in function. So I think helplines to provide also more information on these alternative homes, on alternative living arrangements or referrals would also be helpful. What I would like to bring up is that, okay, we can always speak about the government should do this and the government should do that, but maybe there's also a bottom-up approach to it. Is that how can we create communities of love, care, and respect? So the sense of community, to bring this information back, how intergenerational support from non-kin. What we see now more and more as older adults live alone or live away from their adult children, the non-kin or non-family caregivers or non-family social networks play a very important role. Creating these ties, creating these bonds within the community, or recreating the sense of community is quite important for us. So in terms of rethink housing and care beyond the family, in the Netherlands, the older adults belonging to migrant groups look at housing from what is called a co-housing community. So where people belonging to a same ethnic group, or like for example, we've done research among Surinamese older adults who live in the Netherlands, and they all live within a co-housing unit. So they have independent flats or apartments, but they all live in the same housing environment, thus creating a supportive mechanism wherein they are still independent by themselves, but have look out for each other. We have to also recognize the burden of geriatric care that many times within these households or nuclear families or who have been uprooted or who have migrated out of these places, they may not have the right kind of geriatric, right kind of community support to help in this geriatric care. So there's, from a provider's perspective also, we have to take into account how communities can come together to provide this geriatric care. Most important, ask for help, both for the caregiver and for the care receiver. And that is something that has to come back in these awareness programs to create safe and trusting communities where they are able to go out and engage with the society. And in addition to that, the community, once it comes together, and we know that within larger groups, is that when communities are tight-knit, there is also vigilance and accountability of action. So in that way, that creates a self-sustaining mechanism by which communities can help each other. So some of these projects on which we have based some of the results that I've presented today, we want to move more towards this understanding of how climate change, for example, also plays a role in increasing vulnerability of older adults in different areas. So that was my last slide. If you want to know more about our projects or to talk to us about collaborations, please feel free to email us. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ajay Bailey. That was Professor Ajay Bailey from the Netherlands. Thank you for explaining the nuances of abuse and how their age, gender, and income and disability all add together to complicate the issue. And of course, you ended with a very positive note in terms of how communities can provide the love, care, and respect, and how communities could be the best buffer to ensure that the abuse is prevented or it is taken note of, and support is given to the elderly. Thank you for that words. Now we will move over to, meanwhile, participants, please go ahead and put your questions on the chat box so that we will respond to it at the end. We'll now move over to Ms. Femada Shamam from South Africa. I think, yeah. Over to you, ma'am.
Hello, everyone. Sorry, let me just. Okay, is everyone seeing this? Technology. There we go. Firstly, thank you so much for the invitation to be part of the this webinar. It's really quite interesting hearing the perspectives from the colleagues from across the world. So greetings from South Africa. I want to acknowledge all of the distinguished colleagues from across the world, and also to record my gratitude to the Heritage Foundation for inviting me to share our experiences in South Africa, especially around elder abuse during this pandemic. So to start off, I'm not sure if this is going to work, but I'm going to try. Are you guys, so Raja, maybe if you can just indicate to me, are you seeing the video that is playing?
We are able to see and hear also. Yes.
Okay. So this is a video that was actually shared on social media a couple of days ago. And it actually comes at a time where we were noting as an organization that works with older persons that there's been a drastic decrease in the number of reported cases of elder abuse in the community. You can see this is an amateur video that was taken by a neighbor who witnessed an older person being abused. So we're making certain assumptions. Sorry, I just want to stop this. Certain assumptions around this video itself. One is that we're seeing in this video, there's an adult male who is possibly the son of the older person. He also appears to be the caregiver. And we also sort of get the indication that the older person can't engage in activities of daily living. Therefore, the son is helping to comb her hair and wipe her face. But it does leave you with this sense of hurt when you see the manner in which he abuses her. And the question then becomes, how do we support these people who are not reporting the abuse, but who also don't have access to the means to report the abuse? So for the purposes of this discussion, I'm just going to come back to this video to demonstrate the points that I'm making. And I don't know these people. We try to actually reach out to them as well. But just for this discussion, I'm going to refer to the son as Simon and to the mum as Mary. Apologies to any Mary or Simons that's on this call as well. All right, so before we go into the actual discussion around abuse, for those who don't know about South Africa, we definitely have, we're nowhere near the population of India. Our total population is just under 60 million, 59.6. 9.1% of our population is over the age of 60, so that's 5.4 million. And we've seen a steady increase in the number of older people over the last couple of years. And it is starting to worry because our systems that we have in place is not geared towards supporting older people live fulfilled lives. The structures are not in place. So we need to really, this becomes a call to action, really. The other important factor that impacts on any discourse around abuse, older persons, is the issue around the prevalence of HIV/AIDS. In South Africa, the prevalence is 13%, so 7.8 million people in South Africa are living with HIV/AIDS. Now, why this becomes important is because 7.8 million people are possibly accessing our public health system. So when we have a situation where older people in our country, especially, I think about 80% of older people access public health services, you can understand how the possibility of them being marginalized is a realistic situation when you have a further 7.8 million people who are wanting to access antiretroviral medication. In terms of the legal instruments that's available within South Africa, I think we're pretty progressive. We have an Older Persons Act, which came into effect on the 1st of April, 2010. It's aligned to the International Plan of Action on Aging. So the act itself is structured around the priority directions. And we had dedicated an entire chapter, chapter 5, to the protection of older persons. So all the legal instruments exist for the protection of older people. The Act also criminalizes the abuse of older persons. So the Act very succinctly and clearly states that the abuse of older persons is a crime. Therefore, we follow a criminal process should someone be found guilty of this crime. So these are just a word cloud of some of the words that's used in our Older Persons Act. And you can see that there is a focus around residential care, around the things that we should, must, and may do within the provisions of this act. So what's happening with regards to our COVID situation? So these are the stats that came through from the 13th of June. Every day it's updated. But I just quickly want to take you through, you'll see on this particular day, we had 7,600 new cases. But for me, what's worrying is that we have a total of 82,000 active cases in the country. And each time I look at the number of active cases, I think about the reality of whether or not our health systems can support these 82,000 people. And we've seen this steadily increase over the last 2 weeks. Probably like a month and a half ago, the total number of active cases in South Africa was just below 20,000. So we've seen a rapid increase in the number of cases. We've also seen that there's increase in the number of deaths as well. The epicenter of our current third wave is this little place here called Gauteng. It's the economic hub of South Africa. It's a very small area, densely populated, but this is where we're finding the major infections currently. This particular graph takes you through what our trajectory has been of COVID. You'll see very clearly in June, July last year was our first wave. Around December, January, our second wave. And here you can see the starting of our third wave as well. So we really are concerned over the implications of the third wave in terms of access to services for older persons. Now, this is an interesting graph. I think throughout the world, people have been reporting on the impact of COVID-19 on older people. Our situation in South Africa is actually a little bit different. You'll see the impact is on your age groups between sort of 30 and 50. This is where the largest number of infections are happening. But when it does impact on older people, then the largest number of deaths happen in the older age groups. But more and more younger people are being infected. Now, why this has implications for us is our younger people are generally the formal caregivers of older persons. So if they become infected, it means that older people are now left without the support mechanisms in the community. And it does become a workforce issue when we don't have the people to care for older people. So as we see these numbers increasing, obviously it gives us cause for concern. Okay, so we've also started out our vaccine rollout plan. It was a very ambitious plan. We had a phased vaccine rollout plan. Phase 1 was going to be frontline health workers. Phase 2 is where we have older persons. So our government had anticipated that we would be targeting 5 million older people in phase 2, which started on the 17th of May. And it's anticipated that it should be completed by the end of August. However, there's been a number of issues around access to the vaccines. We've now had to stop with the J&J vaccines. We're only doing the Pfizer at the moment. So the rollout is not going as anticipated. You'll see as at yesterday, the total number of vaccines that have been administered is 1.7 million. By now, we should have at least been at about, say, 8-9 million. So we're way behind in terms of our rollout plan. The implications of this is that we're using the Pfizer vaccine, which is a 2-dose vaccine, and older persons will have to now get themselves to the vaccine sites to get the second dose. So most of the older people within our facilities, about 60% of them, have received dose 1, and none of the residents have received the second dosage. So the rollout is challenging. However, I must say, once we are able to get the officials into our buildings, the manner in which they're rolling it out is super efficient. It's just getting them there, that's the challenge. So getting back to my story about Mary and Simon, as I explained, I think the first thing is that we noting that there is definitely a decrease in the number of reported cases. So we could start off by saying, oh, this is wonderful because it means that abuse is not happening. But I think, you know, that's a pipe dream. That's certainly not the situation. I think that what the pandemic has done is that it's actually limited the number of reporting sites that we have that older people have access to report the abuse. The second thing is that there appears to be a reluctance on the part of older people to actually report the abuse for fear of repercussions for their family members. I think here we have to acknowledge that in most cases, and I think both speakers previously have indicated that the caregivers are generally the perpetrators of the abuse. And the older persons, in most cases, don't really want to be in a situation where they cause harm to their loved ones. As much as they are sitting in abusive situations, they really do not want to use the provisions of, for example, the Older Persons Act, where an older person can actually be put in prison for bringing an older person into a situation of distress. In all of the cases that we've dealt with, none of our older people actually wanted to follow the legal route. They were appreciative of the support that was available to them by the social work team. They were appreciative of the options to get care. They were appreciative that we speak to the perpetrators, but they did not want to follow a legal process. So, you know, this bodes the question. In the 22 years that I've been at the Association for the Aged, I've yet to come across a single matter where we've had a perpetrator that's been put in prison. In most cases, when we work with the older persons, we do respect their right to self-determination. So all options are presented to them. And in most cases, they choose not to follow any kind of legal route. So the provisions are there, but we're not using it. I think also in discussions with many of our older people, they sort of excuse the behavior of the perpetrators. There is a sort of protectionist kind of attitude where, especially where the caregiver is a family member, you know, there's always the excuse that the perpetrator is under stress and the abuse is not intended. They were just feeling overwhelmed by the caregiving role. So they justify that perhaps, you know, this is not as bad. But I do appreciate the comments made by the previous speaker around what is the long-term effects of the abuse, especially where it has been perpetuated over a period of time. They see this as normal. You know, abuse is normalized. And in South Africa, we live in a pretty violent society as well, where people have become desensitized to issues around abuse, not just for older persons, but abuse across the board. So there's almost this belief that it's not so bad, we can deal with this and we're resilient. And I think it becomes important for us to actually have the conversations with people about what a society without abuse looks like. And that requires us having in-depth conversations with older people. So what's been the response in terms of elder abuse? I think from a legal point of view, I've spoken quite extensively that we do have the legal provisions, however, no one's using it. We did try once or twice to actually engage with our local police, where we had a perpetrator and we needed to have the abuser removed from the home because our act makes provision for that. Instead of moving the older person, our Older Persons Act empowers the police to move the alleged abuser from the home. However, the police didn't know what their roles were. They were not happy to do this. And it actually has to do with the lack of information from the various stakeholders. The same with our justice system as well. When you approach a magistrate and say, this is the provisions of the act, I personally have actually taken copies of the act with me when I've been dealing with matters. And there is a reluctance to actually apply the provisions that's been made in terms of the legal instruments. From a social services perspective, there's direct intervention, and this is dealing directly with older persons. And I must say, you know, I take my hats off to the frontline workers. I've seen some of the social workers and the manner in which they deal with older people who have been in abusive situations. It's very difficult to take one step back and not want to let your own feelings dominate the conversation. And you have to work from the standpoint of where the older person is and what their requirements are. The direct intervention generally is to provide support to the older person, to say to them, okay, if there's an issue around caregiver stress, can we put in an additional caregiver, even if it is for just a few hours, and we then activate a network of caregivers to help support older persons and to support the alleged perpetrator as well. The direct intervention is both with the abuser as well as the older person, because our intervention is not meant to break up families. Our intervention is meant to look at situations that's promoting this kind of abusive situation. But how do we build the family? How do we move beyond an abusive response to conflict resolution? How do we have a different conversation? We've also put in place a number of preventative programs. And these preventative programs is from the sublime to the ridiculous. So from a very basic point of view, we've run a number of awareness campaigns, especially during COVID, using our media houses. So through radio, through television, through all of the social media networks, just raising awareness that anything that causes harm or distress to an older person is abuse. That's what it is. And no excuses, this is what it is. However, we had to move beyond that and say, okay, how do we now have a conversation about how we can be different around this? We've also started having programs with our schools as well. Many of our schools are still in lockdown, so South Africa is still in a state of disaster. So it's not business as usual. And we've had to tag along our elder abuse awareness programs to other programs that are running. For example, in our schools, we have a huge problem with bullying. And bullying has to do with someone exerting their power over another. And as our social workers go into the schools, they are actually connecting the two to say that in your school situation, you have a situation of bullying. But if you behave in this manner to an older person, it's actually abuse of older person. So we've tried to be really creative around the mediums that are available to us to actually do awareness programs. Previously, we engaged with older people themselves directly, and we hosted a number of dialogues with older persons around abuse and the experiences in the community. All of this information was then collated and submitted to an instrument of government called the Older Persons Parliament. Our legislation within our province provides for these special parliaments. And at the Older Persons Parliament, older people themselves can actually make submissions around some of the issues that they are experiencing. So the preventative programs includes that as well. The medical response, I think there has been, COVID-19 has also limited access of medical facilities for older persons. Generally, we would use our geriatric clinics as a point for monitoring. Well, there's a whole lot of lines on my screen. We've used our clinics to actually monitor possible abusive situations. So generally, our doctors would tell us that certain situations need to be investigated, especially where people come in with bruises. We've also had situations, I was actually quite interested to see that in some of the statistics that's being presented, sexual abuse has not been highlighted. We actually have situations where some of our older people who have been bedbound had been presenting with sexually transmitted diseases. And upon investigation, we actually found that these older people were sexually violated by people in their family. In one particular case, it was a grandson who was addicted to drugs, and his grandmother was now subjected to this kind of sexual abuse on an ongoing basis, and that resulted in her having an STD. And it was actually the geriatric doctor who alerted us and said, this doesn't make sense, and a social worker needs to investigate. So we're finding more and more there's issues around sexual abuse, and this is not something that's easily spoken about. And it becomes so important for us to put in place all of these monitoring mechanisms to understand how these incidents come to pass and to provide support to older persons when we encounter them. Research response, it's been just so inspiring hearing about the work of Lassie and all the research that's being done. It's wonderful to see all of that. I think that we're lagging behind in terms of South Africa's response. There is an absolute need for us to document issues around elder abuse and to research all of the instruments that we need to be putting in place in order to support older persons. So I think that's something we have to take as a lesson from our colleagues across the world. I think in the last couple of years, there's been no research published around elder abuse in South Africa. So I think it becomes a challenge to our academic institutions to engage in this kind of research as well. So just to sum up, so the theme for this year in terms of the United Nations is access to justice. And I think that's a wonderful theme. However, I think that we really need to bring it down to grassroots level and understanding exactly what's happening with our older persons. Because while we can talk about access to justice, the first step for me is to understand the extent of the problem and to create mechanisms for people to talk about this. So the South African situation, these are just takeouts that I'd like you to take from my presentation this morning, is that in South Africa, we have a situation of the underreporting of elder abuse. So we're not seeing what other people are reporting about, where they're saying that COVID-19 has led to a situation where more older people are being abused. We're not seeing those reports. Perhaps the community experiences are different, and we need to find a way in order to elicit this kind of information. The containment measures have placed older people, especially have placed older people at risk, especially those people who live in the community. And I think here, one of the things that concerns us is that older people in South Africa have access to a state old age pension. It's not a huge amount. However, with the large unemployment situation that we have, in many situations, the old age pension is the only form of income in that household. So very often older people are kept in that home for the sole purposes of accessing that pension. And that pension then is now used as household income as opposed to income for the older person to meet their needs. And in some situations, we've actually found that older people themselves are malnourished because their grandchildren or their children take away their pension money. And I think COVID-19 places those individuals under a whole lot more of risk, and that's something we need to investigate. There is a need for further research to understand the experiences of older persons in the community, especially. And as I said just before I move the slide, access to justice for me has to commence with an understanding of what rights are being violated and how the elders view what a just response would be. And what I mean by this is that I think when we developed the Older Persons Act, we were really proud of ourselves. Here's a very progressive piece of legislation. It's protecting older people. It's got all of the instruments in place. And 10, 11 years down the line, we still haven't been able to use it because older people don't see value in it. They see value in keeping the family together. And that's something that we need to consider as well. Okay, so that's, I think I've kept to my 10 minutes. These are my contact details. If anyone needs to contact me or want to ask any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Fimada Shamam, for that intervention. And you've clearly highlighted the status of the elderly in South Africa. Particularly, you highlighted a very sensitive issue of how the elderly protect their own abusers because they seem to be their own children. It's a very sensitive issue and has to be handled with great tact to ensure that the relationship continues, but the justice is also done. That's something that you have highlighted. And of course, the reluctance of law enforcement, because this seems to not be a priority for them in most countries, particularly in developing nations. I think elderly abuse is not on the top of the list of priority for the law enforcement because they have other very high priority issues to tackle. And you've also highlighted the importance of prevention rather than, acting after things have happened. Thank you. Thank you for that very interaction. And finally, we are moving over to Dr. Elizabeth Mestenios. Over to you, Dr. Liz.
Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me. Yes?
Yes.
First of all, my thanks to Dr. Gangarin, to Ganga, my friend, who invited me. We've worked together before. And I thank him because I heard 3 absolutely marvelous speeches, discussions, presentations, which I do not believe are unique to any one country. There are variations, yes, but I think many of that same kind of findings and the same kind of data is found throughout the world. I cannot say whether the rate is slightly higher in some, slightly lower in others, but no country is without elder abuse. I think let's first of all underline that. I've got some slides. I don't know if they're coming up, but if not, I'll manage without. I wanted to say they haven't come, so, and I know that they were there somewhere, but never mind. Well, one of the things you learn in life to do without anything.
Liz, 1 minute. Yeah, I think the power has gone in the office that they're supposed to host it. Kindly, we have this problem.
Don't worry, I can manage without, as I said.
I know. Liz can manage a big audience for a long time. Take care. Thank you.
Right. Let me just say then, let me manage without. Today's the 15th of June. I've been talking about elder abuse at a rather theoretical level for a long time as a researcher and as an activist. And an activist meaning that really I've not been invited as a social researcher. I've been invited because for the last 15 years, I've been working for an NGO, and also because not just in Greece, but at European level, as I was the president of the Age Platform Europe, which is an organization bringing over 100 organizations of NGOs together. So it is important that we have older people's voices together to talk about elder abuse, but somebody's already said it, it's not an easy subject. We have individual abuse, that is to say abuse in the family typically, or in the neighborhood, in the community, though most of it is from caregivers or those intimately involved. And again, we've noted something, and I want to underline it, that by far the most common form of abuse is what we call psychological abuse, putting people down, insulting them, calling them rude words, saying you're incompetent, you're stupid. And I'm going to say that because I want you to remember this when we come to talk about my theme today. And how do you deal with personal abuse? Well, in psychological abuse, you have, and perhaps other forms too, you have to spend an enormous amount of time dealing with psychological counseling, providing refuge, as other people have spoken about. And I don't think I want to talk about that today. But I'm going to talk about something far more important to me, because it is the context in which abuse occurs. And that is to say, it is the abuse, the form of abuse, which we call ageism. Thank you. Wonderful, it's come up. And you can see that I do not just want to talk about interpersonal violence, interpersonal, not violence, but abuse of all kinds. But I want to talk about the social forms of abuse, which I and everybody else call ageism. Ageism, fortunately, I think everybody understands it. When age is used inappropriately to categorize people, divide them in ways that lead to harm, to disadvantage, injustice, and it erodes solidarity amongst generations. It does not just happen towards older people. It happens quite commonly to young people too, where they are excluded from some things because they are too young or considered. It's a difficult subject. Age is used very evidently as a basis for training, for education. It's logical because the brain develops in certain kinds of ways, though we know people are exceptional in this and develop early, develop late. It's a very rough measure. And what the problem is, we go on using age as a basis for allocating duties, responsibilities, income, all kinds of things. And it's often inappropriate. So let me go on. It's about ageism, it's negative perceptions, attitudes, stereotypes, actions that come from us. And why am I talking about this today? If we go to the next slide. If we can, thank you. On March the 18th, WHO, but it was actually UN General Report, published a report on ageism. And I think that is what I want to underline. It was brought together not only by the WHO, but the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs, Population Fund, and it's a UN global report. Because why? They discovered that ageism was very widespread. It varies, that does vary amongst countries as to how far it is endemic, but it is used pretty well everywhere it can happen. It is common, and when it is negative, it has huge impact, not only on older people, but the attitudes too of younger people and the attitudes of the general society, or perhaps we should say it accumulates this circle of abuse, I call it an abuse, of age discrimination, where it is used inappropriately. We can all have examples of labour markets and training where older people, and I mean people 48, 50, also don't get access to training. At the age of 55, it's very difficult for people to find jobs in many countries. Not just when there's an absence of jobs, but even when there is jobs, still older people are not hired. It can be used when there's an absence. The access to medical services isn't the same for older people. I think some of you will have had that experience. A friend said when he runs homes, he said when one of his residents has to go into a hospital urgently, then he has to call the ambulance. He often deducts 10 years to make the ambulance men come quicker. Now that is a terrible thing to say, but it's reality. When we have inadequate long-term care because governments have decided, oh, this was something that the family could do. And yet in increasingly individualistic societies and in societies where family size is decreasing, where more women are in the labour market, we know that we cannot manage without services to provide long-term care. So when we don't have those services, we know that people are going to be at risk of abuse and by their families or just by neglect. So in that sense, that is a form of ageism where we give due attention to services for younger people, in some cases, but when we don't give due attention to the need of people who are sick, who are no longer able to look after themselves, long-term care is really important. Most countries have care, healthcare, but when we talk about long-term care, you'll find that the amount of spending on that is really quite low. And it's difficult. It's difficult for many reasons to do with the fact that it is not prestigious. It is not an area where people want to work in quite often, where they can't recruit workers. If you ask in Europe, most of us recruit from third world countries or from countries even in Europe that are poorer to actually provide enough services. So that again is a form of ageism where people don't want to be associated with aging and older people. I mentioned mental health care services for youth simply because it's considered that young people don't need services. So that I'm just trying to point out something very important, that ageism can occur amongst and against young people too. And that happens when you talk about media stereotypes, again, about different generations. And too often it's the younger portrayed as irresponsible and hopeless cases, and not like us when we were young. Actually, I think we were worse, but and certainly about older people in many contexts who are presented in a very limited, very stereotyped way. And again, what we are talking about here is this ageist attitudes that are constantly generated and reproduced, and that we have to deal with in a societal, in a governmental, in a political way. Why? And I think that one of the most interesting results from this study, I read it, some of it before, but it's worth reading, is that you people can lose up to 7.5 years of life expectancy from having internalized ageist negative stereotypes. And I would say that that applies to each and every one of us. That is to say, you have to sometimes deal with people, your family, your children, those around you, and you have to stand up and say, but I am worthy of being treated equally. And that is quite difficult in families, especially, and I think our speakers have mentioned about the lifelong inequalities, the biographies of individuals that lead them to have internalized these values of being worth less. Some people are vulnerable, and it's vulnerability that leads them so often to internalize aged negative stereotypes. And I think it's quite shocking to think that people, in the psychological sense that they've internalized these values, lose quality of life. We are dealing, all of us, with, we all have ageism. Let me just remind you that ageism, it's stereotypes we have, and we're all guilty of them. We all can do them. They're shorthand ways of thinking. And you have to confront yourself and think about people as always people. They are equal in deserving of equal treatment. We are talking about the human rights of each and every individual to be treated equally. That's not inequality, is a whole ethical discussion in its own right, and about how you treat people equally in unequal societies and in unequal lives. How we feel about people, we are prejudiced. I often use the word to give you an example, a very simple one, beauty. Beautiful people start off with one kind of advantage. People like looking at them. It's not enough, but it's a prejudice. We all have it. Young people are very often very beautiful. Little kids are beautiful. We start off with that stereotype. It protects young people, perhaps. But it is, these are stereotypes. Aging has been very often a negative stereotype, and trying to deal with that, people trying to deal with people's own prejudice, as well as institutional prejudice, because it's very often reflected in the way people deal with the law, with services and with provision, is we must look at it as to how far we need to do it that way. Is it relevant? Think about jobs. Is it relevant always? Well, if prejudice is very common, it is a prejudice too in the labour market, which then comes out that when people stop working, they then become devalued by not working. Somebody at the very beginning, I'm sorry, I'm really bad at names. I think it was Dr. Sekhar talking about, no, it wasn't, it was somebody else, our first speaker, talking about the need to get people to work. But when there are good pensions, when there are not enough jobs quite often, we have difficulties in trying to value people for what they are when they're not working. And we have to consult and think about that. And we have to think about how we act in our own lives. It's personal, how we act. What do we think about our own actions and how we act towards our own self? One of the curious things about prejudice, about ageism, is that very often people are acting against their future selves. We know most people are going to live a long time. So when they act negatively against older people, you have to try to persuade them that that's really dumb, that they should be considering about whether they would like to be treated that way. But of course, it is difficult. Younger people have no imagination of what it is like to be older. And that is where intergenerational relations, and other people have mentioned this, are really critical. Making sure that you have had enough experience with those of other generations is important, to learn from them, not just learn in a technical sense, but learn that you like some people, whatever their age, and you don't like other people, whatever their age. In other words, that's personal. We have the right to like and dislike people, but we don't have the right to like and dislike them on the basis of age. Age discrimination it's common then, it is everywhere. And you can look at it in insurance, in judicial systems, financial institutions. I won't go into it. It affects intergenerational action and attitudes. And we are not born ageist, we become ageist. Children learn the attitudes from those around them. So when they colour a map ageist, it is because they have learned from surveys about how children, how younger people, how middle-aged people see older people or young people. And it's very common for them to, by the age of 4, young people, very young people, begin to learn ageist attitudes. So changing them, shifting them, changing the stereotypes is difficult. And I think we've all seen a shift in the public, in the American, I say the American because so many of us get the stereotypes from American media, and that they're reproduced in our own cultures. But it's really important that we change those stereotypes. So working on media is just as important as working in labour market legislation. It's not enough. Legislation, I'm very glad that our previous speaker talked about legislation. It's important for the legislation perhaps to be there. It is nowhere near enough, neither at the level of personal abuse or even dealing with ageism. We have to reshift, rethink our own attitudes. 1 in 2 people are ageist or reported as ageist at a global level. And I think all of us face rapid social change. I want to talk about one of the final things, because I know I'm dealing with time constraints. We are dealing with rapid social change. Let us take the example of digitalization. Maybe in India, it's different. I know in Greece still, under COVID, one positive outcome was the huge number of older people who started using media, digital media, and began to keep in touch with their families in that particular way. But we have, when societies have not bothered to provide training and opportunities, free Wi-Fi, our access to Wi-Fi, machines and iPhones that they can actually use, smartphones that they can use, or things. These are new forms of abuse that maybe we never thought about. But when it becomes digital, access to digital technologies become a human right, because that is how we communicate. We used to talk about illiteracy. Now we talk about digital illiteracy. It's a new form of abuse, and one that we all have to deal with in all our societies. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to have been here, and that's it. Thank you. Can't hear you. Ganga, can't hear you. That's it.
I'm asking them to close the presentation.
Okay.
Hello. Hello.
Hello?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, Dr. Raja. 1 minute. Hello, Raja. Dr. Raja. Okay, I'll ask them. Yeah. Just hold on for a second, Liz, 1 minute. The usual technical itches that come up.
That's right.
Just small things, yeah, just a minute. Please unmute Dr. Professor Raja Samuel. He's not able to talk. Huh? Host? No, he's a host and he's been a moderator. He is not coming. Please do that immediately. He has to close the session. There are typical things that happen despite all our efforts.
Yes.
And Dr. Shekhar, thanks. I will wait for Professor Raja Samuel to come. Till then, I thought I will say that I think all the 4 presentations have been fabulous.
Yes.
I think each one of you gave a lovely perspective. And I think Dr. Shekhar, particularly, his talk would have been very, very useful to the Secretary to the Government of India.
Yeah.
I think he touched upon the policy points. He touched upon how the LASI study could be useful and wonderful. I think same thing with Dr. Ajay, who mentioned about different kinds of housing for people with abilities and without dependence, with dependence. And Dr. Shamam Femada mentioned about lovely things happening in South Africa, particularly talking of healthcare limitations to people, old people who can be marginalized because of the HIV epidemic. And Liz, of course, you are always a big speaker on the subject, very close to your heart, on discrimination and abuse. And you have been talking about this in Europe. Now, I am
Yes,
waiting
I've come
for
back.
Dr.
I've come back, Dr. Nagaran.
Please
Thank
take
you.
over.
Thank
Please
you.
take over.
Sorry for
I'm
the
just keeping.
pitch.
No, that's okay. It happens.
Dr. Liz, it was amazing to listen to you. And the word ageism has such a deep meaning we were able to understand today. And particularly as a categorization and how it can lead to discrimination, it was amazing to listen to that. And it was also eye-opening to look at how reduced life expectancy itself can be caused by a negative stereotype of aging. That's amazing. Thank you so much for that intervention. As Dr. Gangadharan pointed out, all the 4 speakers have been amazing. And since there's shortage of time, we'll be going through a few quick questions. One of the questions, some of them are not related directly to the presentation, but one question goes like this: is there any plan to include virtual groups to improve companionship or a sense of belonging for the aged, for the elderly? Will that really help? Any of you could would anyone volunteer to answer this? Would virtual groups improve companionship? Okay. Particularly, I will ask Dr. Liz, because you spoke about internet and how abuse can happen because they don't have internet access even.
That's right. I think, for example, I can talk about Greece. We've had community social groups long time now, 30 years plus, and they're important, but they're important to about 7 to 10% go. So what you're dealing with here is the fact that the majority of people are not actually active. And even if you start digital groups, it's those who are proactive, who are a little different, who are educationally a bit better off. Your problem so often is the people, and I love the speaker talking about the biography of people. They have been downtrodden, if you want to call it that, for a long, long time, trying to get people to assert their human rights when they've never had them is difficult. The greater the social inequalities, the harder it is to deal with the rights of older people at older age. I know, I can see for mother shaking her head, and she knows that very well. It's nice to see people because I get some kind of feedback. I think it's extraordinarily difficult. And yes, it's another technology. It can help. My problem is the people in the most difficult situations are so often the ones who are least able to access this kind of help. That does not solve the problem. I don't know what the solution is, except less inequality, more education, lifelong development of an understanding of your human rights. I think education is one of the major keys, but that's all I can say. I don't have personally a magic wand to do it, but I think digital technologies are essential for everybody. 20% of our population is still not using digital technologies. Okay, who are they? Older people.
Right. Thank
Can
you.
I?
Yes.
Sorry,
Yes,
can
Elizabeth.
I
Yes.
maybe just add to that as well? I think, our experience with COVID has been a sort of hybrid solution where there are some of our older persons who are very tech savvy, who have access to smartphones, who can do stuff on the phones. So we've actually encouraged these individuals to become our communication champions. So they are the ones who receive the information, but they share it with their networks of people, and it's smaller networks. So it's making sure that we still within the COVID protocols in terms of safety and not having large gatherings. But if, for example, you're living in a community and you have access to some people, and there's one older person who has access to technology, then we utilize those informal networks to spread the information and to share support networks. So we actually found that the gift of COVID has been this development of all these informal support networks. It's been wonderful. And older people have found ways to be resilient and to be able to get through difficult situations. So I think we mustn't assume that we have to come up with all the solutions. Our older people are just a wealth of information. I think we just need to have the conversations with them about how do we think they can help us achieve the outcome we want to achieve. So I think for me, the issue is not to focus on the communication channels as such, but to look at what is the outcome we want to achieve. What do you want to communicate using this digital platform? And ask the older people. They will tell you how to get the information out there.
I agree. Thank you. There was a question related to even Dr. Shekhar had in his presentation said that 6% of elderly were living alone, and among them 9% were women who are living alone. The question goes like this: how do there are elderly living alone, and they are prone to crime, and what are the ways to stop and protect them, stop crime and protect them?
Yeah, it's a very, very important issue. We always hear a lot of reports, particularly in the media, about the elderly living alone were killed or attacked in many places. It's quite common in a city like Mumbai, and there are, of course, there are some police checkups and police support helplines, and there are some NGOs who are constantly keep a watch on these elderly. But now, what is happening in a city like Mumbai? These incidences are increasing. So many of the elderly, they were living in their own houses lonely. They are moving to some kind of old age homes outskirts of Mumbai, where they have the support of the friends and the security and more attention. And there were instances where some of the families were, even after the death of the elderly, it took many years for the neighbors to come to know about there was a death in that house, so because there was no contact at all. So it is a very, very serious issue. in the rural areas, it may not be that serious because there are a lot of interactions among the community. But in urban areas where even we have no idea about who is our neighbor, and many times we are reluctant to talk to them or interact with them, a lot of issues are happening there. I think some of the organizations, civil society groups, NGOs are doing some good work, but it is going to be a serious issue. The number is going to increase tremendously, even in rural areas, because of large scale migration of young people to the cities in search of education and employment, and elderly parents are left behind. So it is going to happen everywhere. There is no immediate solution to this problem, but one is that there should be, we should create awareness among these elderly whom to contact in case of an emergency, and they should also register with the nearest police station and other thing in case of anything. Immediately they can go frequently and have a routine checkup to what is happening to these people. So there are some provisions in some big cities, but it is not in a big way. And in fact, FEMADA in her presentation mentioned about one issue of elder abuse which we have not given enough attention is the sexual abuse. I fully agree to that. And in most of our surveys, particularly in India, we are a little reluctant to ask this question. When we are framing the questionnaire for the LASI, we had a lot of discussion whether to include that question or not. In fact, our American collaborators were arguing strongly for that, to include that question. But considering the situation in India, and we are going to survey the elderly, a large number of elderly widowed women, and asking them about their sexual experiences, and it's quite difficult. Like I am asking my grandmother in a survey about this. It's quite a culturally sensitive issue. So we told our American collaborators, no sex please, we are Indians. So, but I fully agree with you. This is a serious problem, and it is not probed enough, and it needs more careful attention and investigation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. With that note, I think because short as your time, we will wind up. I'm sure the others have noted down the questions and the chat, and there was quite a good interaction among the participants themselves in terms of comments. So thank you so much, panelists, for that very enlightening session on a very important topic that confronts all of us. And I'm sure you have done great justice to it by exposing the various facets of the problem. Thank you so much. Now, please, participants, please remember to give your feedback on the feedback form so that your certificates can also reach you. Over to Dr. Gangadharan.
Yes. Now, there is nothing for me to talk except I enjoyed every presentation, every talk. I think the whole purpose of bringing you all there is to, all of us to share. I think especially some of us who never met in the last 2 years' time outside our own cities. I think it's a beautiful learning. When you're talking about being internet, I can tell you that how do we connect with the senior citizens? Yeah, people that probably in India, 80, 85 probably struggle, but I can tell you in this program, there would have been at least about 50 to 60 people who are senior citizens who sent me messages they are not able to link, but I sent them links and they all joined. Any number of them have come in. I think that is something which is people are getting technical savvy. I think we are delighted to have you all with us. And I must say, except only one word is left to say, I'm grateful to you and look forward to more such encounters in the future, because we are going to have series of workshops this year and going to talk about specific subjects. We are not going to, this time we have spoken about elder abuse, but we are going to talk about specific subjects, which means we are going to probably learn together what's happening around the world and what is that you and me can contribute to the quality of improving the quality of life of elderly. And I'm very sure we are not going to spare Dr. T.V. Shekhar despite being very busy with his documentation. We want him back with us for more such, deliberations. And I want, FEMADA has been part of us in the last 1 year programs. This is the third one she joined us. We look forward to our, experience sharing. Same with Liz. Liz missed some of our programs last year. Liz, be with us, reserve some dates. I'll give you a lot of dates in advance. Be with us to share, because I want a lot of young people to learn what is aging and what really happens in aging. We just don't want to be talking about it. We also want to show some nice programs that all of us conduct in a video show, so that we don't look at aging as only a problem of abuse. I think aging, old people also bring in a lot of lives. I think they also bring in a lot of happiness to the families. I think we need to present those schemes also in this. I'm very sure all of you will join me in doing that. And I would like to say once again, thank you. Remain in contact with us. And any of you want the proceedings of this video, please write to us. I will send it. Then we can see, because we cannot send it to all. I'm only talking about the resource persons. If they want, we'll be very happy to send them to you. Thank you once again. Be with us and join next 2 days. I think tomorrow the presentation is going to be from, I think particularly Liz. It's going to be 24 country representation by our friend Freek Lapre from Amsterdam. He's going to talk about what has happened, what is the findings of 28 country in Europe. I think that's going to be very interesting on elder abuse. So let's continue to listen. Thank you so much. Thank you once again. After, for rest of the others, those who have finished the feedback, kindly say they can leave. And Dr. Raja Samuel, thank you for being with us today to moderate the program. You did extremely well. I would like to place on deep sense of my gratitude to Selvamani, Prabhakar, Vijay Lakshmi, Sweta, and Pugar and Hari, who have been behind us going through the trouble of putting this together, because India experienced a lot of electrical power fluctuations. We still managed it with all of us disappear and coming back. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.